and choices reflect universal values. They must include the knowledge and perspectives of those who, for far too long, have been excluded. In contemporary art, art curators are distancing themselves from exhibitions that consist of primarily white male European and American artists. Curation has shifted from an international towards a more transnational and intersectional practice. This shift, influenced by feminist and black art movements, has aligned with a larger shift in global politics. In art, these practices have adopted a post-colonial strategy of inclusion, seeking to represent multiple voices in art. These curatorial practices have been a catalyst steering to change existing power structures and change the narrative of art history towards a more inclusive art canon. More than ever, art institutions and art experts will have to point out new directions. But they can only do this if they are open to new understandings of a culture that is diversified, understandings that are not defined by one group alone, and that entails also diversifying their staff. How to change patterns, how to disrupt power structures. Our invited speakers and artists contribute each in their own way to the current transformation of the art world. They will share with us and you their experiences and knowledge and will offer us possibilities of change. It's my great honor to connect our speakers with you in our hopes to empower and inspire you and get change going. As chair of ArtTable Netherlands, I am proud to welcome you to this dynamic event, and I am proud to share the ideas and visions of these creative leaders with you. Each speaker will give a brief presentation. Please feel free to respond to their presentation by using the chat app. Now I would like to offer the floor to our moderators today, Emily Patik, Director of the Rijksacademy, and Mahuti Awunu, Lecturer Social Inclusion at Amsterdam University of Applied Arts. Thank you and welcome.
Welcome audience, and welcome and thank you for tuning in this afternoon. We are live with this international event, Empowering Voices in the Art World, to celebrate the 15th anniversary of ArtTable. I want to thank Mirjam Weste for this warm and special introduction and for organizing this special event. She is the chairman of ArtTable, and I'm very delightful to be your moderator here today. Even though we can't meet each other in the physical, we can connect in the digital. And that's exactly what artist Janne van Heeswijk tried to do with this big welcome. It was a big challenge, but I think the warmth and the inspiring words of all of our guests were really felt. So thank you all guests and speakers for joining in this art welcome that Janne van Heeswijk introduced. Her work is about social awareness, it's about change and about mobilizing people. And with this big welcome, she tried to close the gap between the physical and the digital realm. We are live streamed from Framer Framed, and I want to thank Framer Framed for having us here and holding space for this important conversation. And my name is Mahuti Awunu, and I'm your moderator for today. And I'm not alone, I'm here with Emily Patik. And Emily has a long and meaningful history in the art world. She is the director of the Rijksacademie van Beeldende Kunsten in Amsterdam. And her work emphasizes on process and exchange as a curator, a director, a writer, a community engager, where she is interested in how art spaces can play a civic role by critical engagement and complex questioning. Hi, Emily.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you. I am going to introduce you. Mahuti Awunu is an enthusiastic social work teacher at the Hogeschool van Amsterdam. She has 10 years of experience in education and inclusion in theatre and education. She teaches in various educational settings. Her passion for talent development comes to life in working with young people and young adults. For this target group, she mainly develops an educational program on current social issues with a focus on identity, sense of belonging, anti-racism, and decolonization. These themes are also reflected as a community builder in higher education, as one of the founding mothers of SEISI Community Centre.
Yes.
She's an experienced moderator in theatre and for various cultural platforms in the country. So it's really wonderful to be here with you. And also I'd really like to say how happy I am to be part of this day with all these amazing women, and particular thanks to Pauline and Miriam for inviting both of us, and Framer and Framed for hosting. I already heard a lot of really inspiring things in the welcome, which makes me excited about what's going to come through today in this space of shared thinking. The conference puts important topics on the table that I can imagine many of us here today are working in the cultural field and beyond are busy with and very committed to. So yeah, I admire all the women in the lineup today, who each will share examples of institutional change and the brave work that comes with it. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing about it. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker. I can see her on screen.
Well, maybe I will explain.
Oh, you're going. Sorry, yeah, you're going
to. You want to start, and I understand because we are excited. Yeah. But maybe for the people at home who are watching, it's nice to know what the event is all about, and what they can expect, what the program is. So in the next 3 hours, we have great speakers and panel of experts that are going to contribute to this program. And everybody today is coming from different contexts and different institutions, but are all here to reflect and inspire us from their position as women in the art world. And I'm really excited to bring them on today. And as Miriam already told us, that you can join us by the chat function on Zoom. So you can make comments or ask questions, but only if you are watching with Zoom. Unfortunately, if you're watching with Facebook or YouTube, we're not able to see your questions. And at the end of every talk, we will open the chat function, and we will open it up for conversation and Q&A. We only have a short amount of time, so we will select a few questions for that. Well, the program. We will listen to 4 keynote speakers during the day, and the day has 3 big chapters. So we will start with the speakers Sofia Hernandez and Clementine Delis, and close this first segment with a performance by spoken word artist Bob Schons. After that, the second segment will exist out of breakout sessions. The breakout sessions are about collecting and the public domain, about programming, and about outreaching. That will be about 30 minutes. And after that, we have the other 2 speakers, keynote speakers, of Sonia Lawson and Asma Naim. And Bob Schons will return one more time to bless us with her performance, and Miriam Weste will close this event with her words. So now we have the time to introduce our first speaker, Clementine, Emily.
So, well, I'm very pleased to welcome our first speaker. I'm sad she's not in the room with us, but that's the sad thing for all of us today. But at least we get to connect anyway. So Sofia Hernandez Chongqui is the director of Kunstinstituut Meli in Rotterdam, which recently changed its name in January, and I'm sure it's something that Sophia is going to talk about. The name change process involved a lot of contributors, and took a process of, well, Sophia arrived, I think, 3 years ago or more. And yeah, it's something that she was a welcoming present for her to initiate this process. Sophia's Mexican, and before moving to Rotterdam, she was working in New York as the curator of the Colección Patricia Phelps de Cisneros. Prior to that, she was the director of the Museum Tamayo in Mexico City, and beyond that, she has huge experience as a curator and writer. I'm going to hand over to her now. Welcome, Sophia. I can't hear. Yeah.
No, we can't hear her.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect.
Great. So I'm going to begin. It's a brief time, so I'm just going to get to it. Thank you so much for the introduction, dear colleagues, and for the invitation from ArtTable to present. I'm going to jump directly to say that on January 27th of this year, my institution, which was formerly known as Vite, was renamed to Kunstinstitut Meli. But this was not the first time that our institution was renamed. The conceptual blueprint of our institution was sketched out in the 1980s. It was at that time that we were called Kunsthaus. And it was only a couple of months before opening our doors to the public that the institution was registered with a different name. We opened on January 27th, 1990, with a name referencing the institution's location, the street Wittewitstraat in the center of Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. This name was given to our institution by policymakers and cultural workers in Rotterdam that were interested in promoting the city as an international artistic hub and in developing a cultural axis in the city center. I'm not sure if you can read those documents, but I'm going to explain. The political agenda, or this political agenda specifically, was motivated by the Rotterdam Arts Foundation, which was established in 1945. The foundation was an independent council of art advisors and policymakers in the Netherlands, originally tasked to help rebuild the city's cultural infrastructure after the Second World War, when Rotterdam city center had been bombed and mostly burned down. The yellow dots there is just so that you could see where our building is located. Our building is from the 19th century, I'll talk about that, and we actually we're not, we were just next to the bombing in the city center, but we were not affected. During the 1980s, under the direction of Paul Norman, the foundation marked 2 geographical markers on either side of this new cultural axis that they had envisioned. At the one end of the street would be the Maritime Museum, and at the other end, the new Institute, as well as the already existing Boijmans Museum next to Museum Park, and within its gardens, a new Kunsthal. The connector of this all would be Wittewitstraat, and the plans positioned our newly conceived contemporary art and theory-oriented institution as an axis at the center of the street. The development would be promoted as a museum boulevard. Naming the newly conceived institution Witte de Wiet over the option of Kunsthaus endorsed that very effort. Today, Wittewitstraat is lined with cafes, hotels, and shops, and of course, art centers. Next image, please. Can you do image? Exactly, thank you. At that time, and to some extent at present, naming cultural institutions after their location had become a common trend. There are many examples of this in the art field. For instance, in the 1970s and through the 80s, Rotterdam had the Lijnbaancentrum, a cultural center within the open-air shopping mall, which was an innovative urban development of the post-war years. Another case in point is PS1 Contemporary Art in New York City. Established in 1971, PS1 stands for Public School Number 1. Needless to say, a whole different context and set of motivations and development informs the institution's renaming from Witte de Wiet to Kunstinstitut Meli in 2021. The present context has been shaped by the decolonizing movement in the Netherlands. It is a context that demands a revision of colonialism and that involves addressing histories of slavery, advocating for anti-racism, and questioning the authority of worldviews largely scripted from a European perspective. Our present is informed by a multivocal community and dissonant heritage. Take note that a recent report by the Migration Policy Institute indicates that more than 40% of Rotterdammers are foreign-born or have at least one foreign-born parent. The 2020 statistics of the World Population Review, for its part, indicate that the most of the foreign-born residents of Rotterdam come from Suriname. Residents of Turkish, Moroccan, and Dutch Caribbean descent also contribute to the city's super diverse population, which is made up of more than 600,000 residents in the city center. Another way to look at this is how the researcher and local politician Peggy Winton describes it. 1 in 8 Rotterdammers is a descendant of an enslaved African person. Now, please allow me to change track a bit, to move forward by actually going back a couple of years. Let's begin with the summer of 2017, when the publication of an open letter to Witte de With catalyzed a discussion at our institution and a cultural debate in the Netherlands. The letter condemned our institution for not having critically regarded the colonial reference of its name, even while working at that time on an art project about decolonizing. The namesake of our street is a 17th century naval officer, Witte Cornelisation de With, who served in the Dutch East India Company and the Dutch West India Company during his lifetime. These companies were instrumental for the Netherlands' colonial expansion, including the Dutch involvement in the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. The open letter to Witte de With was authored by Egbert Alejandra Martina, Ramona Snow, Horan Warsame, Patricia Shore, Amal Al-Hag, and Maria Guggenbichler, and it was co-signed in support by many more people. For its part, the art project under discussion was Cinema Hollanda, by artist Wendelin van Oldenburg and curator Lucy Cotter, and it was created for the Dutch Pavilion at the 57th edition of the Venice Biennale in 2017. Taking as a starting point the modernist architecture of the Dutch Pavilion in Italy, the project including films exploring notions of political transparency in the Netherlands, especially as it pertained its colonial legacy. The project had a parallel iteration in Rotterdam. Here it was called Cinema Hollanda Platform, and was organized at our institution by its former director and curator, Daphne Ayas and Natasha Hoare. Platform consisted of an event-based exhibition presenting work by cultural producers who contributed to Cinema Hollanda in Venice, and who had further expounded on its theme and practices of decolonization in the Netherlands. Neither the subject matters nor the exhibition dynamics were new to the artist. Van Oldenburg has regularly involved aesthetic strategies that, according to the art historian Sven Lutiken, they aim at implication. Direct implication, site specificity, and institutional critique is also at work in the online open letter to Witte de With. This letter publicly challenged the institution. Besides calling out the legacies implied in the institutions named, it called attention to the need to dismantle the long-standing system of references and cultural mandates it promoted. It also called attention to the inherently inequity in the art fields and the embedded emotional labor when provisionally engaging Black people and people of color. The following video clip, it's only 30 seconds, is from the first episode of Meli TV, programmed by my colleagues Jessie Koyman and Vivian Zerl. It was filmed and broadcast on our name launch back in January of this year. If we can play the video, please.
Er is een vergadering hier in het instituut. Op een gegeven moment werd de vraag gesteld: waarom moeten deze zwarte lichamen dat werk doen voor het instituut? En als gevolg van die vraag, of uit die vraag voortkomend was: waarom zouden deze zwarte lichamen dat decolonisatiewerk doen voor het instituut, in een instituut wat de naam draagt van een kolonisator?
Cinema Hollanda platform certainly communicate much more than what is here summarized. This missive and the project amplified an existing debate on decolonizing the Netherlands. For social media platforms to newspaper editorials, discussion were had of whether the institution should change its name. By the autumn of that year, in 2017, the institution publicly announced that it would indeed make a change to its name, to much controversy. And a couple of days later, the institution also named me as its new director, informing me and announcing publicly that I would be tasked with making its name change. I wasn't the only one surprised at this news. Now, before I speak of the events that followed, let me take a couple of steps back further into the past. The street Witte de Witstraat was named as such in 1871. It was at that time, in the second half of the 20th of the 19th century, when street naming in the Netherlands was systematically formalized. The historian Rob Koolhoes explains that among the practical factors dividing this decision were the introduction of the postage stamp in the 1850s, the new data capturing administrative systems known in the Netherlands as the bevolkingsregister, and urban developments in cities at large. A central interest conveyed in the street naming during that time period was a consolidation of the nation state that the Netherlands was experiencing. Consider that the Netherlands had just gone through years of political conflicts resulting in a geopolitical order. This went in part with new legislation, much of it fostered by Thorbecke, we're talking here about the Constitution of 1851, and eventually of a formal political denominational segregation known as pilarization, with three primary groups: Catholics, the Protestants, and the Humanists. This was also a time when the so-called Dutch Golden Age was revived and widely promoted, with literal references in city texts, visual references in stamps and currency, and a material reemergence even of Blue Delft ceramics that were popular during the 17th century, among many other things. Here on the bottom left, if you could see it on the screens, is a chart that ArtTable that I got from Robert Koolhoes' paper. I didn't put a caption, but I think that that's important to mention here. These are just only a few instances of a large array of irreligious cultural endeavors that helped forge the idea of a shared history within the new boundaries of the country. These were also symbolic ways to convey and normalize imperialism, maybe also or probably to celebrate it. Not disconnected to this was the abolition of slavery in Suriname and the Dutch Antilles in the 19th century, but not of the dissolution of colonial rule altogether. As the historian Kwame Nimanko and the late Glenn Williamson wrote, the Dutch legally abolished their part of the Atlantic slave trade in 1814, following the British, and on the 1st of July in 1963, more than 45,000 enslaved persons gained their formal freedom. And yet, a practice of indentured labor immediately followed and continued until the 20th century. But as it pertains to today's presentation, I want to highlight one of Nimanko's and Williamson's observations, that the absence of public anti-slavery debate characterized most of the 19th century in the Netherlands. It never became a social movement then, nor was the subject that captured the heart of the entire nation. And for those that are versed with the painting of Turner, with the reception by John Ruskin and the eventual collection of that painting now, according to me, in the United States, and the debates that followed in Britain in the movements, it was completely different or silent in this country at that time. We're talking here about Zong and of that painting. Anyhow, I'm going to come back. This brings me back to the art project Cinema Hollanda and Open Letter. While this project was institutionally sanctioned and the letter independently endorsed, both deal with dissonant heritage, however differently. The common underlying critique of both is a systematic regard of colonialist exertions and the long-standing impact that these have had in their aftermath. The dissonance between these, however, stems from the positions from which these emerge, from the racial factors and racialized associations of what the norm deems sanctioned and considers marginal. And as it were, where that symbolic sites are contested by dissonant heritage, our institutions simultaneously became a catalyst and a target of critique. During the past decade, there have been other cases where the museums engage with dissonant heritage in the Netherlands. An early case, for example, is a debacle around a statue of Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, Governor General of the VOC in the 17th century. That statue was erected in 1893 in the city of Hoorn, Cohen's birthtown, and was at the center of a public debate in 2010-2012, meaning a decade ago, triggered by a citizen's proposal to remove the statue, considering its personification of VOC genocides. The local West Fries Museum, which is just in front of it, and this is their website, which, I'm sorry, it's not in Dutch, I tried to find it, but no, in English, I'm sorry. The local West Fries Museum staged an exhibition as trial at that time, literally, Most voting audiences favored keeping the statue. Regardless of this, city authorities had decided to keep the statue anyway, adding a plaque that ends with a brief line that refers to the existing criticism that Cohen, quote, does not deserve to be honored. The historian Lisa Johnson analyzes this performative exhibition as a way of cooling off a hot topic. I'm going to give a brief footnote to say that that statue was actually proposed in the late 19th century by a teacher and eventually erected, and then the movement a decade ago about bringing the statue down was led by another teacher and the local historian. So I think that it's interesting, the relationship between educators and debates and controversies of heritage. A more recent case are the discussions surrounding the Amsterdam's museum decision in 2019 to change the denomination of their Golden Age galleries to simply 17th century. This name change acknowledges that the material culture of such time period is not golden for all the represented, implying that one party's achievements are at the sake of another's inflictions. And I'm hoping this will be further addressed today by one of our colleagues. As I mentioned earlier, in the 1980s, the goal of Rotterdam Art Foundation for making a Witte de Witstraat, a cultural access in the city, was very clear. Our former names served their purpose. At present, our institution's name has to serve another purpose, and it had to also respond to other motivations and social developments. And this is why the proposal for a name change at our institution was premised on two central criteria. First, that the former name indicated the institution's location, but did not convey our vocation. And secondly, that the former name impinged upon a pursuit of social inclusivity. Impinged, which is terrible. And the pursuit is vital to the relevance and contribution of cultural practice in general. Short flashback again to the 19th century, which I love for many reasons. The building that houses our institution was originally designed as an all-women's higher burger school, also known here as an HBS. Built in 1872 and 1873, this means 1 year before the naming of our street, both the building and school are representative of the modernist philosophical projects that the Netherlands set in motion in the second half of the 19th century, especially in education, I would say, though its design does not comply with the revival of 7th century style. I point to this because at Kunstinstituut Melli, we have been regarding our galleries as classrooms. We consider that our changing exhibitions offer a unique pedagogy for educators and a creative occasion for the public to experience changing value systems manifested by contemporary art and theory. The motivation for this is in order to change structures, so difference can be philosophically addressed and so inclusion can be socially fostered. For our team, the name change has been an opportunity to initiate a process of institutional transformation. This is the main reason why the initiative has been unhurriedly paced and to much criticism, I am very aware. Rather than making changes in a rush, we instead embrace the challenge of creating a community for collectively carrying out a meaningful change in the institution, for them, for us, and for the field. I put that TV still because I look terrified, and the truth is that I have been terrified these last couple of years with such responsibility. Anyhow, collectively, this last has become a reason to turn our institution's only ground floor art gallery into a multi-purpose programming space, standing for the face of a changing institution. This very room also became the strategic site for developing new forms of public engagement and no less become a case study for our renaming this year. If we can please play the video clip number 2. It's short.
Het is een experiment, dus we hebben deze ruimte geopend om te zien wat er gaat gebeuren, hoe het gaat gebeuren, welke mensen er komen, welke mensen het zich eigen maken en hoe het eigenlijk verloopt, want niemand wist dat. Het was eigenlijk echt een totale nieuwe invalshoek, echt een experiment voor Witte de Wit. En omdat we dus niet wisten wat de precieze definitie is van hoe collectief leren zou uitpakken of hoe de ruimte zich zou vormen, heet het dus untitled, omdat het dus nog heel vrij is om te worden wat het moet worden, zeg maar.
We hebben met de jongeren gewerkt aan nadenken over wat een culturele instelling is. En daarvoor hebben ze workshops gevolgd over beeldende kunst. Dat is onze eerste vorm van kennis eigenlijk, van wat wij doen. Maar ook over ondernemen en over community, hoe we dat samen kunnen doen.
Thank you for that. As you can see from this video excerpt, am I done? Ooh.
Yes, Sophia? Sophia, do you hear me? Sophia?
Did my time end?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for your wonderful presentation, but we really have to round up. So if you want to close it for a minute, and then we can go to the Q&A and the comments.
Okay, I have
Yes?
2 paragraphs, eh?
Okay. Yes, let's go,
Okay.
let's go.
What a disaster. I cut it already so much.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Okay, so that's Melly Sham, the artwork of Ken Lam, and very quickly, I'm just going to go, we can go to the next slide, slide number 40. The transformation of this wide cube gallery into dynamic programming space, now named Melly. The creation of a curatorial position in charge of collective learning, the development of new strategies for public engagement. These are some aspects of our name change initiative. This is our initiative's multi-year roadmap, and as you can see there, our name change is only one part of this trajectory. This is a detail of our renaming process now, specifically which took place last year and which specifically involved the institutional renaming this year. With many lessons learned from this process, we opened this spring an initiative that deepens our public engagement. This initiative is called 84 Steps. It's at the intersection of art and education. And 84 steps is actually the number of steps that it takes from going from the ground floor to the top floor galleries in the 3rd floor. I can't wait for the lockdown to ease and to welcome you all there. And the last chapter I will remove, so I end here.
I'm so sorry for the last chapter, but I really want to thank you for your presentation. It was very, very informative in such a short amount of time. And what I really want to thank you for is your transparency. You really opened up about this process and that it's been really challenging for you as a new director, but also challenging in these times that we are living with the pandemic, with the Black Lives Matter movement that is really big, and also with the critique you gained as an institution. You told us about the open letter you received in 2017, and that it really puts fire in the place where you are working. And I wanted to ask you about how did you create an open space where constructive dialogue and discussion about the colonial history and the decolonial action could take place with people within the institution, but also with the community outside?
I think that first of all, I have to say that thank you very much for your question. For me, it was very important to emphasize in this presentation that a name is a debt, and that when you use a name or namesake of someone, you have to think about who is it speaking to, what is that name representing, what are the lineages that it's representing. What became very clear is that the institution had been completely unrelated to Vita de Vida or the colonial period, and that Vita de Vida had, as a name, had become a brand and a way of working or positioning of arts. And I think that the main aspect that that was important was to think why internally at the institution was to think why have the programs that have been developed over the last 30 years, of which a number have been very much about identity politics, why are these programs not being referenced as positive contributions to the field? And it meant that the critique was a critique that had to do with a kind of question of access or insertion into the mainstream, instead of the acknowledgement that there were other forms of knowledge that had to be recognized and included. And that meant that we needed to restructure the team in such a way that the programming was much more in terms of learning and educating ourselves and also our existing audiences about those other forms of learning that were not just framed within an art historical canon or a strategy of insertion, say, into the mainstream. And so I think that that's to begin with. So structuring the team happened early on. It's actually not early on. It's taken about 3 years, but we've included already 3 staff members that have been very important to the institutional development. I've already mentioned a couple here. There was also the education rethinking that the program of education didn't have to do.
Yeah. Sophia, there's a related question through the chat from apologies if I get the name pronunciation, Sujatha Balastaram. I love and agree with the idea of using the museum as teaching environment, but in the new environment that we're facing today, post-COVID, how would you say we can imagine the use of the museum for education?
I think that the education, or for us learning, has to do not just with output, but with research and input. And that research can be had with, that research can be made public and could be organized publicly and built collectively in different modalities. I would say that the conversation and the dialogue that doesn't stir necessarily from the art object, but from the interpretations of an art object that are standing already is one way to do it. What we are creating right now with 84 Steps at the institution is we are turning our 3rd floor into a kind of wellness center in which each of the galleries, there's 7 spaces that are transformed, each of them by an artist, as a type of space where an activity, either with one person or 2, or with a larger group, COVID permitting, could allow for workshops and trainings. And the trainings, again, bring into the mix not only working within the environment of the arts, where arts are socialized, but also introducing other forms of knowledge that are not necessarily based on a question of aesthetics.
Sophia, I wish we could hear more.
Yeah.
I wish we could hear more, but sadly we have to move on to our next speaker. I hope that everyone gets a chance to engage with what you're doing, either online or coming physically soon. And I just want to thank you so much for your contribution today. I'm going to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Clementine. I'm really happy to introduce Dr. Clementine Dillis. Clementine works across the borders of contemporary art, curatorial practice, and critical anthropology. She's Associate Curator of Kunstwerke, Institute for Contemporary Art, and the Director of the Metabolic Museum University. Between 2010 and 2015, she directed the Weltkulturen Museum in Frankfurt, instituting a new research lab called Object Atlas Fieldwork in the Museum, and a number of other projects. And she's also co-director of the Home Museum at African Artists Foundation in Lagos. So I think she's going to talk about all of these things, and I'm looking forward to it. Welcome, Clementine. I'm handing over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Welcome. And a big thank you to all involved in organizing the ArtTable Amsterdam. My question is to you, why do we need, coming back to the question that was just posed to Sophia, why do we need something like a museum university to perform the decolonial? So it seems that we're going to be talking quite a bit about reframing institutions today. And I'm interested in the possibilities raised by a fairly radical redesign of the spatial and ergonomic language of museums, in particular, museums that were established under the cultural politics of colonialism. Here, as you see, a natural history museum, ethnography museum, design, art history. I think that by reprioritizing their physical space and foregrounding, in the case of museums with collections, their artifacts, in order to try and develop new conceptual but also educational work, then we will begin to at last address the diasporic student public that is facing the museums today and is being treated far too often like a consumer. So for me, collections, in particular ethnographic holdings like what you see here, which was collected by the Frankfurt Museum in the 1960s, are actually essential agents in the decolonial process. In other words, if you want to try and do a decolonial, perform a decolonial operation on art history, then how are you going to do it if you don't have access to this material? These objects, these artifacts, without authorship, because of the way that colonial collecting was set up, actually contain live wires of ingenuity. I'd call it even stored code in art, design, history, architecture, engineering, forms of production, ecology, environmental questions, not to mention traces of violence, translocation, and appropriation that literally cry out for a new kind of remediation today. I think that the referentiality of these important collections is yet to be extricated from colonial and ethnographic taxonomies. And this is where the decolonial enters the conversation. So that today, while these artifacts in all of the museums in Europe remain rooted in the global north, sequestered in these museums, in their storage spaces, more than ever before, we need to pull them out and we need to think of a new type of architecture that would allow for a visual education to take place that would be a form of democratic intellectual activity. In other words, you don't need an exam to go into a museum yet. You may need a COVID test, but you certainly don't need even to have your school exams. This, I think, is really important for the rethinking of collections and their implementation in a new form of educational proposition paradigm. Okay, so in art history, it's fairly common now to recognize 1989 as a moment of transformation with the dissolution of the Soviet states, the Tiananmen Square protests, the demolition of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany. But as you will know, 1989 is also regarded as a key global turn, a watershed moment in exhibition making. So at that point, the exclusive North American, Western European axis is confronted with alternative flows of modernism and contemporary art from the global South, which we're still trying to deal with in many ways. And today, one generation after 1989, the emphatic awareness created by Black Lives Matter in 2020 has brought with it a further floodgate, a second paradigmatic shift, now shaping how arts institutions contend with representation and equity. My commitment as a white European woman to this process, or maybe as a feral academic, is to push towards legislation for the right of access to colonial collections sequestered in European museums. This stance is informed by the work that I did for 5 years in this ethnographic museum in Frankfurt, and subsequent models that I've been testing out in different places. So you see Ottobong and Kanga in the laboratory of the Weltkulturen Museum. Between 2010 and 2015, I took on the controversial, because it is controversial to take on a museum like this. It's the most, it's the worst museum you can possibly find. The non-redemptive role of directing an ethnographic museum in Germany, established in 1904, and which had 70,000 artifacts from Africa, Oceania, Southeast Asia, and the Americas, as well as literally 100,000 photographs and films. So to begin institutional deconstruction, I drew up alternative plans for the use of the rooms in the museum's 3 villas. Now, okay, we had villas, so this made it easier to work with a notion of domestic research. But this simple act of changing the functions of use, the ergonomy inside museum spaces, is one of the most important today. I introduced a new workspace, which I called the Labor. It included studios, apartments, a green room for student exhibitions, and a kind of a salon. Living in the museum, artists, writers, filmmakers, and lawyers could work with the collection as they wished in their own time and with 24-hour unobserved access. They could come down in the middle of the night in their slippers. They could look at artifacts that had been taken out of the storage for them to work with, and they could go back up to their studio or go back up to the flat and have a glass of wine. So this was a very important cycle in the process, which then ultimately led to an exhibition. The museum, therefore, became a crucible, or as Foucault would call it, a foyer d'expérience, for negotiating new relationships and responsibilities to the institutional history of this museum and its collection. Now, over 5 years, I would argue that ethnographic nomenclatures and monocultural presentations of cultural singularities or masterpieces of so-called tribal art were effectively suspended. Here you see Yvette Mutumba and Minerva Cuevas. This reframing of what can only be seen today as a defunct colonial museum. In other words, for me, there is no ethnographic museum anymore. It is not possible to speak of an ethnographic museum. Yes, we can speak of a so-called ethnographic collection because that's how it was attained or acquired, plundered. But you can't really speak of these museums, even if you call them Weltkulturen, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't deal with the problem of the division between art history and anthropology. This kind of work that you see here, this reframing of a defunct colonial museum, was a precursor to the concept that I'm now developing and have been doing so for 5 years of a museum university. In other words, an attempt to deal with these civic institutions by clashing them, by clashing what you do in the venue, by transvesting the exclusivity of their discourse and their modus operandi. With a museum university, it's collections that are brought out of the debasement of the cellar and introduced into the central space of the venue. Such radical repositioning and installation contradicts the consumerist walkthrough by providing everything necessary for hours of study with tables, chairs, technology, and of course, students. Collections are essential in the development of alternative art histories today and metafictions, not through the colonialist discourse of research, but through processes of retrieval, gathering, decoding, and restituting, what Saidiya Hartman so beautifully calls a work of critical fabulation. The remediation of materialized trauma can help to critique and take apart colonial systems of archival and disciplinary classification. Restitution is a necessary metabolic requirement for the museum of the 21st century. And look at it. All these are snippets of journals and magazines where everybody's talking about restitution, but they're doing it mainly in Europe. And it becomes a kind of a ping pong between cultural politicians in different countries. And remember that restitution is also shackled by one important feature, that is conservation. Remember, no blood, no oil, no sweat, no breath, no friction. No direct human relationship is possible as long as these artifacts are held under European jurisdiction. If parapolitical academia makes slow steps forward with the restitution of maybe 23 objects or 26 back to Benin City in Nigeria, then what do we do meanwhile with these vast amounts of important artifacts? I mean, 5 million easily in Germany alone. How do we get into these collections in order to rethink them and heal their disenfranchisement? Very quickly, because we don't have time, I will show you 2 photographs of forensic imaging undertaken in museums. This is a new development. You bring in a hospital-level MRI scanner into a museum. You put the most mystical, the most undiscovered objects, if you like, into an MRI scanner, and lo and behold, what do you find? That they have internal ducts in a solid piece of wood. This is, as you will see, it also allows for the direct creation of an exact virtual digital replica of the artifact, of its surface, but also of its internal constituents that time, as they say, will never alter. So you have to imagine that this is going on. This is a grotesque photograph here of an anthropomorphic sculpture being pushed feet first, in other words, like a corpse, into an MRI scanner. And the fact that these photographs are now in the ownership of the museum, and that with these photographs they can reconstitute these objects. It's a big debate. In order to deal with this and to try and shift the perspective, to try and deal with the slowness of restitution politics, I worked with Azu Nwagbogu and Lagos Photo Festival and the African Artists Foundation on a project called Rapid Response Restitution. Our aim was to bring the museum of the 21st century quite literally closer to home, into private spheres of historical, cultural, and familial knowledge. The danger of reifying the concept of home, right? Not everybody understands home in the same way, was evident to us. Yet we were more interested in breaking the museum down to its smallest, most humble common denominator, far away from the colonial emporium and towards a real community-centered crucible of experience and a generator of collective historical values. The result was homemuseum.net, launched with an open call in the first phase of the corona pandemic. So over the course of 2 months, 240 individuals from around the world responded to this brief, which was sent out through social media in Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, Swahili, Wolof, Portuguese, Nigerian, Pidgin, English, French, Russian, and Chinese. And it was drafted as a letter to a friend, an invitation to take part in co-creating a new digital museum by sending in photographs of objects of virtue, objects of value. Homemuseum.net is another model of a museum of the commons, a kind of a borderless venue, a space for sharing and dialoguing, which can ultimately transform into a visual digital museum university of the 21st century. And now I'd just like, if you could, to just go through some of the pages of Home Museum. It was designed by Birds of Knowledge. Next. And Birds of Knowledge, a student collective in Hamburg where I was teaching, decided to remove age, gender, and nationality from the classification of these 2,000 photographs. They wanted, if you like, to consider what the digital architecture of a museum might require and how dangerous it might be to enter into the colonial matrix in an online context. Okay, next. Please go on. These are some of the pages of the individual co-creators. This is the only classification, A to Z, and here you could build your collection. Okay. So, since leaving the Weltkulturen Museum, I've explored different models for a metabolic museum university. It's connected a lot not only to organs, to the idea of the corpus of a collection, but equally to rhetoric, to this understanding of different relationships between knowledge formation and those elements around us that trigger new concepts. 2 years ago, an iteration took place in the context of the 33rd biennial of graphic art in Ljubljana. And what we did, next please, was to spam the hang. In other words, to build chairs which had tables so you could put your computer on that were connected to a beamer. And the beamer would then project in between the existing paintings or the existing exhibition in order for a new referentiality to be developed by the punter, by the visitor. We squatted exhibitions and museums during the Biennale, holding seminars and talks for all to join, visitors, and this was purposefully done in the surrounding of artworks, not in the sanitized area of an amphitheater. Right now, the MMU is based at KW. I gathered a group of peers, friends, and colleagues who come together, artists, situation designers, a novelist, a publisher, a feminist anthropologist, an art historian, a curator, and, very important, a lawyer. And our inquiry goes through many different prototypes and models specific to each of the members of this new faculty. And as it progresses, the Metabolic Museum University will expand to include companions, an associated group of students who will work closely with the MMU faculty and delve deeper into the holdings of Berlin's museum. And what you see here is material from Erika Hoffman's collection, which is contentious, difficult to show today, and why. This is what we need to start. We need to start re-engaging with museums. So to conclude, I would like to suggest that the Museum University could be imagined as a new form of horizontal architecture, providing an optimal environment for growth and flourishing. When I think about it, I think of a greenhouse. I think of, historical collections being repositioned and navigated into very transgressive polycultural constellations. This academic iconoclasm performs the decolonial by fracturing divisions between disciplinary bodies and dissolving barriers reified through academic systems inherited from the 19th century. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clementine. It's really amazing to hear about what you've been doing in all these different contexts. And I see a lot of commonalities to what Sophia was talking about shifting a museum or exhibition space towards a more horizontal, collective study approach. I'm curious, in a way, because you've talked a few different ways that you've been working. One, which is embedded in the museum from within, like a kind of critique from within, that I imagine, created a big rupture in a way to the habitual ways of a museum that had I can imagine a long trajectory of working in a particular way. And then you've talked about kind of para-institutional kind of models, about very independent approaches. And I'm wondering where you feel like what model is most effective in a way to creating change. Is it the kind of rupture from within, or is it to work in a more light-footed kind of independent way? Where I'm curious about your experience.
Well, I really believe that these collections are important, and I still don't understand why there aren't enough artists and students and people who are really fighting to get access to these collections. And if you do that, you contradict the apparent expertise of the armchair anthropologist who has read all the books and can tell you really what one object does and another one doesn't do. But the problem is that this all stems from a taste out of the 19th century, from the collections of missionaries, from the collections of anthropologists and traders. If you bring a younger diasporic student body into these collections, are they going to pull out the same objects? Probably not. They may look for other objects of virtue, objects that for them have transgressed anachronism. Maybe they find clues to something that they want to use for an architectural project. Maybe they can build filters from analyzing fish traps. There's so much in there that for me, it becomes really a political issue to keep coming back to them, to keep saying, hey, if we want to change museums, we have to change the architectonic priorities. If we bring these collections out from the cellars, bring them into the main rooms of the museum, what is changing? What is really changing is that we use the museums differently. And when I say democratic intellect, I mean not specialisms, right? I mean a generalism that would be based on a 21st century understanding of connections. And these are connections that are being brought together very quickly by younger people. And yet the materiality, the weight of the past, it can't be buried and left behind, sealed off to the younger generations. Who has the right to do that? On what basis? On the basis of conservation? On the basis of value? On the basis of expertise? It's very difficult for me to find a logic that would legitimize holding back access to these collections. So yes, it is a tricky thing to do as an independent curator. We're doing it at KW, but there's no collection in KW, but Berlin is brimming with crypts.
Can I ask you, when because there was a lot of emphasis on listening actually in the big welcome, which was really nice to hear, and I'm wondering, do the institutions listen when you're doing these? Is there what kind of attention is it getting in the institutions?
Well, I think the most recent and most important has been the cooperation in Nigeria with the National Council of Museums and Monuments. And the fact that together with the African Artists Foundation, we were able to access the storage of at least 8 to 10 museums. And this was just the first recce. I mean, this was just the first attempt to see what is actually in Nigeria. And when you begin to talk to the curators there, you realize that they're also dying to rethink what to do with collections. And I'm sure this is possible here. Only ethnographic museums, for some reason, they're getting through it, right? They're carrying on. And we have the Humboldt Forum here, and it's really quite frightening to see how these constellations of racism are being reformulated for younger generations. And in a very conservative world, a reactionary world, the most appalling thing would be for these problematic constellations to be used for xenophobic reasons.
Yeah, I hear you say a lot about also the younger generation and about talking about accessibility. How do you think that educational and academic art institutions can play a part in changing the institutions and decolonize the institutions from within? Because they set the curriculum for new students, and a lot of new students are critical and really want to take action, but still have the old knowledge base, the traditional knowledge base, classical knowledge base from the academic institutions. How do you see that the art spaces and art institutions can make a change in the educational field?
I'll give you an example. Nearly every artist, every academy, every art school, art university is interested in a new building. They're all trying to build a new building. Okay, let's think about that building, and then let's think of the possibility that the Rietveld, for example, says that all the students that are studying there, in order for them to have a sufficiently inclusive, participatory art history course, they need access to the Tropen Museum's collections, full stop. They cannot do art history without having access, but we need a space. You can't just go into the bunkers. Bunkers are not meant for human beings. You have to work on a new architectonic model that will allow students to work through different constellations, different assemblages. This is not the same as open storage, right? Open storage is gloating. It's like, look at what we have. Look how many things we have. What I'm talking about is bringing together very heterogeneous elements that could include a score of music, could include a legal document, could include a number of different objects that might have an environmentally conscious vector to them. They might really open up our minds to forms of survival that we need at the moment. So I think the two go together. You need an institution to say, let's try and make a new type of museum university. Let's include chairs and tables in museums. What is this? Every time you walk in a museum, you see people, they swipe past, right? They walk through exhibitions. They're not encouraged to sit at a table. Yeah. And I'm convinced that a lot of artists would be quite happy to have tables everywhere in that empty space between sculptures, just like you can span the hang in between two paintings. And if you add your Facebook page, inevitably you will start to make a biological connection to what you're looking at, right? So there's this kind of power, this weight of the notion of context that is new ideas from being developed around constellations of artifacts. So there are many things going on here. And I in working in this way, I often ask myself where I can contribute to the question of the decolonial. I don't run an institution, so it's not for me to make sure that people of color are employed. I'm not even employed. But what I can do is battle constantly against this kind of specialism, the experts.
Yeah, and raise a lot of critical questions. And that's what I really love about your presentation and about the conversation, is that you bring out these new perspectives. And it's about maybe not even transforming it, but tore it down and rebuild it again with new knowledge and with this new generation that has the power to change. So thank you very much for your contribution. Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Clementine. I think we have to move on because we're already running a bit over schedule. I can see looks. But thank you so much. It was brilliant to hear about what you've been doing, and looking forward to following it further. I think, well, to sum up a little bit from the first two presentations, I think what strikes me is the kind of dialogical horizontal approaches that both Clementine and Sophia talked about as ways to change institutions in a unhierarchical, collaborative way that foregrounds education as part of change, about embedding also change within institutions structurally, and opening institutions also up to wider constituencies about access. And I think, yeah, both show very inclusive models of change. I can see the commonality also of, as I mentioned already, museums as educational spaces. Mahuti, have you got thoughts from?
No. I find it interesting also as an educator that you see that also educators can be at the beginning of movement, of change, and I think Sonia gave great examples of that. And that you see that the museums and the educational field can really make a strong connection together by changing the institutions both ways. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we have to move on, or you have some last words?
No, you go.
So we're going to the breakout sessions in a minute, and I want to explain them to you because you will be transferred automatically. If you are in the Zoom, you are transferred automatically to one of the breakout rooms. But if you want to change one of the teams, if you want to change the breakout room, you can press the button. It's called the breakout button, and there you can see the 3 programs. So it's about collecting and the public domain, about programming, and about outreaching. If you're watching through Facebook or through YouTube, you stay here with me about outreaching. And otherwise, if you're in the Zoom, you can make a choice of your own. If you need help, there's Nikita. So you can send Nikita a private message and she will help you to go to the breakout room. The first one is with Imara Limon from Amsterdam Museum, with Melanie Boeler van het Frans Hals, with moderator Mariette Dolle. And this one is about collecting and the public domain. The second one is with Sivora Elders, Kunstvoort en Sonsbeek Institute, and with Katayoun Ariane from Tent. And the moderator is Emily Pethick. And the third one is with Asfa Bijnaar van Musea Bekende Kleur and Irma Ben-Lian from Kunstmuseum Den Haag. And this one is with me. And the breakout rooms are about 30 minutes. And after that, we are coming back here and we're going to the third chapter. But first, I would like to introduce a woman whose work I admire. She's an Amsterdam-based writer, she's a host, she's a performer and a teacher, and for years she has been artistic leader of Poetry Circle Nowhere. In 2018, she won the Black Achievement Award for Art and Culture, and in 2019 she published Hardop, artwork of 18 Dutch spoken word artists. And this year she wrote the Book Week poem, and Babs writes articles and is columnist. She performed on many stages all over the world, but today she is here to perform for you, the amazing creative soul, Babs Gons.
A seat at the art table. More than muses, more than works of art, more than models. We seem to be what is missing in this world of art. Our voices, our presence, our bodies. This is how we want our art. This is how we want these walls, these buildings, these pages and poems, these sculptures and symphonies to tell our stories, our way of being and our way of seeing the world. coming from our lips, our ink, the strokes of our brushes, giving voice to the bodies that hold these stories of ages and ancestors of the past, the now, and the future. We will write our lives. We are no blank canvases. We are not walking works of art. We breathe art. We translate heartache and joy, misery, sweet love, our homes, our skies, sunset and stars, our models and still lives, our comings and goings and our revolutions. Our memories and mistakes, we melt them into ballads, blend them into rituals, writings and portraits. We sing our own song, compose our own choreographies. Let us speak on these walls. Let us change the narrative. History to be represented by us, with us. No one knows us better than us. We need our bodies back. No one knows them better than us. We need our color back, our images. We want our breasts back. We want our thighs and our bellies, our ankles and collarbones, our movement, our gaze and our dance. We will shine light on the shade we have been in. We've been listening too long to this one-note song. We need to hear the other side of the melody, the whole story. Let us change the narrative. Who else than us to paint the faces of our existence, to praise our heroines, our protest singers, our poets, warriors, our thinkers and writers? We'll fill in those blanks you left on the walls. We'll paint over the holes, give voice to the mouth you have forgotten to draw. We will portray our mothers, our grandmothers, our daughters. We will portray our pride, our joy and pain, our emancipation, our blues, gospel, soul, and our freedom. We will immortalize them on canvases, on walls, papers, give them names, call their names, give them homes, a place to call their own. We will paint them out of the silence. Let us change the narrative. We will grace the stage with our presence. We will draw over the mask our true faces in watercolors, mixed with our magic. We will breathe our own space, use our own profiles for the way we love something, the way we lose things, the way we mourn and celebrate life in slow strokes and abstract shapes. Come celebrate with us all that we are, because no one knows us better than us, tells our stories better than us, paints our portraits, catches our light, translates our visions into design, the contours of our beauty, the outline of our struggle, and the story of everyone, every woman who came before us and you forgot to include and give space to.
Okay, am I on? Okay, yes, I'm on. Asfa Bijnaar, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Thanks a lot.
I see you clear and I hear you clearly. Thank you
Oh.
for being here today. We're now live with a breakout session about outreaching. For the people at home who are watching and you want to make a change, there's still a button in the chat with the name breakout session, and there you can choose the breakout session of your choice. The first one is about collecting and the second one is about programming. But today we are going to talk in this breakout session about outreaching. And what is the meaning of outreach? Why is it important and what is the purpose? And what are the challenges and the successes of outreach within the work of my guests? I think it's also about access. Accessibility is an important ingredient to be more inclusive for a wider range of people. And a warm welcome to everybody who is here today. I see some people who are joining, and I want to give a warm welcome to Asfa Bijnaar and to Irma Ben-Lian, of course. I want to give a short introduction. Asfa Bijnaar is an independent researcher, advisor, writer, concept creator, concept developer, and director of the Education Studio Foundation. She recently wrote and developed Afrispectives. It is lessons for secondary education, a set of lessons about Africa, its diaspora, diversity, and identity. She's also the overall coordinator, developer, and spokesperson for the national collaborative project Musea Bekennen Kleur, where more than 31 museums in the Netherlands jointly take action to make diversity and inclusion in the Dutch heritage sector more sustainable. And I think you're going to tell us a lot more about this. Irma Ben-Lian, she studied industrial design engineering at TU Delft, followed by Rietveld Academy. And she began... Okay, there's something going on here. Maybe somebody from Technique can help me out. And then I'm going to introduce... The tablet is talking to me. And it's maybe disrupting the conversation. So Irma Ben-Lian, one more time, studied industrial design engineering at TU Delft. And she moved to the cultural sector, head of marketing and communication at Kunstmuseum Den Haag, the Hague Museum of Photography, and KM21 towards the end of 2016. Since joining the organization, she has helped develop the new identities of Kunstmuseum Den Haag, and she also played a key role in a number of diversity projects, such as the exhibition Splendor and Bliss, Arts of the Islamic World. Her personal goal is to ensure that all of the museums, communications, and services express a feeling of hospitality and room for diversity. So there are big speakers who are here today. Asfa, you're going to give us first presentation. After that, Irma is going to give us a presentation, and then we have time for a Q&A and have a conversation with the people who are joined here in the breakout session. So I give the floor to you, Asfa.
Yes, so there is a PowerPoint. You received my PowerPoint. Can you put it on for me?
We are waiting for the PowerPoint of Asfa.
Yes.
1 second, the technique says.
Yeah. Okay, I will start.
Yes.
I would like to present to you a new and actual museum project running in the Netherlands at this moment. And it's called Museums Bekennen Kleur. In English, you can say museums see color, literally meaning acknowledging color, but actually focusing on diversity and inclusion in the museum sector. Musea Bekennen Kleur was initiated 2 years ago by 4 museums: Central Museum, Bonnefante Museum, Frans Hals Museum, and Van Abbe Museum in the Netherlands, of course. And the direct course of this was the announcement of the Rijksmuseum that they will present an exhibition on the Dutch history of slavery in 2020 or 2021. Well, it's known for a long time that all the efforts made in the Netherlands during the last 30 years to improve diversity and inclusion in museums hasn't been that successful so far. So the urge to do something about it is getting stronger. Slide 2. Okay, this is okay. So after a procedure in which candidates were invited to pitch a plan of action, me and my teammate Sofana Telage were chosen to further conceptualize and develop this initiative. So we started with these 4 museums, but within a short period of time, we found 13 museums to join Musea Bekende Kleur. And this group consists of small and large museums located all over the Netherlands. As you can see on the slide, but the first slide was, well, it's not going that good with the slide. I would like to prefer slide 3 now at this moment. Yeah. Okay, these are the participants of the first round. And the next slide, you can see the participants of the second round. Okay. Well, the official launch of Musea Bekende Kleur was March 2020, during the opening of the exhibition Rembrandt's Black in Museum Het Rembrandthuis. It was an exhibition that caught worldwide attention for it shows underexposed works of art by Rembrandt and his contemporaries, featuring Black people in a new exhibition. Slide 6, maybe now. Okay, this was slide 5, nice. Now we can go to 6, yes. So right after the successful launch, Musea Bekende Kleur had to face several challenges. COVID-19 breakthrough and lockdown our society. George Floyd was killed and brought numbers of Dutch people to the street to demonstrate against racism, to join the Black Lives Matter movement. And museums were suffering loss of income because they had to close doors. But to our surprise, none of these critical issues had a negative effect on the development of Musea Bekende Kleur. Remarkably enough, Musea Bekende Kleur saw itself growing, also thanks to the awareness that the Black Lives Matter movement brought us. And within a short period of time, no fewer than 20 museums and archives subscribed for Musea Bekende Kleur. And still, new museums and archives are seeking to participate. At this moment, Musea Bekende Kleur connects 33 museums and archives. And for your information, the Netherlands has almost 680 museums. Luckily, despite COVID-19, we were able to continue our activities for Musea Bekende Kleur, especially setting up the core activity of Musea Bekende Kleur, namely the reflection sessions. And I will come to that later. Well, the first step was to visit these museums and to interview them. We wanted to find out more about their motives to join Musea Bekende Kleur. So we had long talks with the teams consisting of the director or the head of curators, the head of education, of communication, and so on. And we talked about their vision, their goals, their efforts and problems and challenges that they had been facing in realizing diversity and inclusion in the organization through the years. And as a result of these talks, a few things came out. First, museums admit that there is a problem in the museum field with representation of diversity. Second, most diversity projects are mainly visible to the public from the outside and hardly leading to structural changes within the organization itself. Third, the most challenging aspect for the organization is to recruit colleagues with different backgrounds. Fourth, the lack of an intermuseal platform to exchange knowledge of diversity issues and all issues that creates discomfort. Fifth, an ardent wish to create such a platform. And sixth, the willingness to go that far to publish a statement sooner or later about how museums will work on diversity and inclusion. Now, what is the objective of Musea Bekende Kleur? Well, that is to unite museums in a sustainable way in their aim to actually anchor diversity and inclusion in the DNA of the various organizations. We focus on the 4 elements, namely program, public, staff, and partners. And the basis to work this out is the Diversity and Inclusion Code that was developed in the Netherlands last year, as you can see on slide 7. Can we have slide 7? Yes, this is the code. Okay. But firstly, what is the advantage of the collaboration of Musea Bekende Kleur? Well, this is the first time in Dutch history that museums on this scale will collaborate in the field of diversity and inclusion. To strengthen the mutual partnership and cooperation, Musea Bekende Kleur is developing several projects, but in this presentation, I would like to focus on one of them, the Intermuseal Platform for Reflection with as output a statement. So can I have slide 8? The central part of our strategy is the use of reflection sessions. And through these sessions, we research, discuss discomfortable and sensitive issues in order to bring our thoughts together within the participating museums. And note that these reflections are the heart of Musea Bekende Kleur. The reflection sessions are conducted under the guidance of a professional process supervisor, as you can see on slide 9, maybe. Oh, no, okay. But point of departure is a safe setting to have these conversations together in which the following core values form the basis, namely vulnerability, self-criticism, and curiosity. To have these core values embedded, we organize a ritual meet and dialogue beforehand. It's called the Kitty Kotti Dialogue Table. Can I have slide 10? Yeah. The Kitty Kotti Dialogue Table is an invented tradition introduced by Mercedes Zandwijker. And like me, she is from Surinamese background. She's from Surinamese background. And Kitty Kotti refers to the Dutch history of slavery and literally means breaking the chains. And these dialogue tables are now becoming increasingly popular, both nationally and internationally. The table is used as the first session to get acquainted and to come closer together. The Kitty Kotti dialogue tables, originating from the Jewish and Surinamese tradition, aim to increase the awareness of the inner and social conflicts and blind spots that arise from the complex historical and social backgrounds of the Dutch slavery and colonial past in order to obtain insights. Can I have slide 11? We have gone through 7 sessions in which we ask ourselves, what does diversity mean to me or for the organization? What is my role in the organization when it comes to diversity and inclusion? What are the non-written cultural symbols, the heroic attributes, the patterns, norms, and values of our organization? How does the organization cope with institutional racism, discrimination, and exclusion? What is the perspective from which we create and develop our programs? How can we recruit new colleagues concerning diversity? What can we learn from the outlooks of our websites and the architecture of our museum concerning diversity, and so on and so on? We were lucky to have 2 sessions physically, face-to-face, and the other 5 sessions took place online because of COVID-19. No need to say how challenging that was, for reflecting in passport photo format kills many of the eye contact, facial mime, body language, and so on. Nevertheless, it became clear that everyone took their participation bloody serious. They were enthusiastic and engaged. We had sessions every 3 weeks, and each session lasted 3.5 hours. The participants were given assignments to be carried out within the organization. So what is the output of these reflection sessions? The results of where we stand after going through these sessions is expressed in a statement. And that statement is in process at this very moment. A statement that will lead to joint effort for substantive policy change, make agreements about this, and ensure that agreements are complied with. After that, the participating museums will continue the partnership in order to keep working on the above-mentioned ambition in the coming years, in order to realize that we no longer need to be afraid of being vulnerable, self-critical, and curious. Can I have slide 12? Thanks you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this informative and inspiring presentation. We're going to have a conversation about your work later on. I want to welcome our next guest, Irma Ben Lian. You are there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. Nice to
Hi.
see you. You were also part
Nice
of the
to
big
see you too.
welcome. I really enjoyed the words that you shared with us. I already gave an introduction to the people in the breakout session about who you are and where you work. So I want to give you the floor with your presentation.
Super. Thank you. Can you start the PowerPoint? Yeah, that's me. Oh, that's actually not me. That's that's someone in the museum. Well, thank you for having me here. Although I'm not a very experienced speaker, and I'm definitely not a policymaker, I'm really happy to be here and tell you a bit about the way I try to take my share in changing the narrative, as Bob Schons just said so beautifully. The theme of this outbreak session is outreach, which is a pretty important subject for the Kunstmuseum, as it was designed to be accessible for everyone. The museum actually has been reaching out in a big project for the last decade or even 12 years. Can you go to the next slide? For a decade now, we've been organizing our so-called city district nights in The Hague. This is a project to make the museum accessible for everyone in The Hague. And in 6 nights every year, we open up the museum and invite every city district to visit the museum. On these nights, over 1,000 people visit the museum. Transport is taken care of. You can also go to the next slide. And food and drinks are taken care of, and there's a program filled with guided tours. You can go to the next slide. Guided tours and workshops, and it's really a great way to make the museum, especially socially and financially, accessible for everyone once a year at least. People get free tickets as well to visit the museum during the normal opening hours, and but this way, at least the transport is also taken care of, as we know that there's a lot of poverty in The Hague, and the trip down to the museum can be unreachable for a lot of people. But this art table session made me think, does the word outreach really cover what I'm working on on the longer term in the museum? And what's the purpose of outreach? To invite and engage new communities to the museum, and to be open for everyone. But it made me come to the conclusion that the word outreach is part of what I'm aiming for, but it doesn't cover the whole picture. For me, outreach also means staying fixed to our own point of view, the Kunstmuseum with its beautiful building, exhibitions and collection, and reaching out to people so they can come to us, see our view on visual arts and applied arts, and of course, reaching out is not a bad thing. It's a beautiful gesture, as we see at our city district nights. But I do believe to be really accessible, we have to look at more, such as pricing. Can anyone afford to come to the museums? In the whole of the Netherlands, by the way, I think museum pricing is quite high here. But mostly, we have to change from the inside as well. So everybody can find something for themselves in the museum, and everybody can recognize themselves in the museum. And in this short presentation, I'd like to tell you about how I experienced the change in the museum so far, and what ingredients which I think are needed in this transition, and that's trust and space. Can you change the slide? Changing from the inside is quite difficult. For me, the first step was my team. Oh, you can go further. Next slide also. Is my team diverse enough? Is the whole museum team diverse enough? Are enough voices represented in age, culture, gender, educational background, but also in social class? To create a diverse team, this had to be something we could talk about. But also, I personally experienced how sensitive this subject is. In my first week at the museum, a colleague told me that my non-Western background was pretty convenient for the museum, which totally freaked me out. really, because I didn't want to be hired for my bicultural identity. I wanted to be hired for my skills and my talent. But now, 4 years later, I do see that it does make a difference. Not only my cultural background, but also my education. I'm trained as an engineer, and the social class I grew up in, all bring diversity. And in the past years, I had the chance to make some changes in my team by breaking open job descriptions, for example, in experience needed or the education needed. We managed to diversify our team with excellent people. We also apply the Rooney Rule, which is pretty important in this process. And I was thinking you could also call this outreach, reaching out to anyone who wouldn't apply at the museum because it seemed impossible to get a job there. And opening up the doors and calling out to people. You can come work here. You are welcome to work here. And I can't say that I'm there yet in diversifying my team, but we are getting there. And most importantly, it's a subject that we now can discuss with respect and openness. Can you go to the next slide? This openness is also something I learned with the creatives I work with, such as photographers. An interesting example is the collaboration with photographer Munir Raji. We met during the preparations for our exhibition, Splendor and Bliss, Arts from the Islamic World. In this project, the team, so the project leader, the curator, and I, we searched for a photographer for a big assignment with roots in the Islamic world. Something I found extremely uncomfortable to mention. But Munir and I talked about it. And literally, it pushed the elephant out of the room. Munir didn't have any experience in object photography, and he had a totally new approach for us. Somehow, the curator, the project leader, and I had faith in this collaboration, and together we made something new for him and for us. Can you go to the next slide? His photography wasn't just object photography. He created stories. You can also go to the next slide. Initially made for the catalog and for marketing purposes, these photos came out so beautiful and so in depth that they became part of the exhibition. This brings me to another part of the Splendor and Bliss campaign, in which we learned a lot. For the campaign, we invited a number of online influencers to make their own content about the exhibition. You can go to the next slide. For example, the Healthy Sisters, who gave their own tours and cooked their own meals in the museum. They brought home-cooked food for their guests. But also vlogger Saladin. The next slide, please. He talks about Muslim life on YouTube. He's very popular, and he interviews younger generations about the decisions they make. He visited the museum with a couple of young Muslims with a question: would you visit this exhibition or take your parents to it? And the outcome was pretty confronting. Almost no one was really interested in what we had to offer. They found it pretty boring. And Saladin even asked us if we agreed on publishing the video on his channel. And we did. It was honest. It was his view on our work, on our exhibition. And it turned out to be really interesting because the comments under his video, in the comments, a big discussion started about how his followers thought and that it was a great exhibition, and it was great that it was happening in the Kunstmuseum. So a vivid discussion was started in an online community that we wanted to reach, and we got really honest feedback. So I guess what more could you wish for? We learned from it. There are much more projects I could talk to you about, which all have in common that we worked with people who showed us their view on arts, on museums, on what they wanted to see, instead of the other way around. Next slide. A small project I want to end with is Division is Multiplication by Qasim Arif. a young Pakistani Dutch artist who is also a proud inhabitant of The Hague. That's how I know him. We started talking last year during the first lockdown and thinking about doing a project together. And we just talked, and it was meant to be something small, something online. And we ended up making this ball inspired by our collection. And it ended up becoming a small exhibition next to our Delft Blues section with an amazing mural. Yeah, thank you. Which means, which says the word blessing. And that's exactly what this project is, a blessing. We talked and we made something together. It didn't come from us, and it was a synergy between the two of us, to say. To shortly wrap up this presentation, somehow I now work in a museum where I have a lot of space to reach further than my own marketing field. I have the chance to experiment, work with new people, work with new methods, and in different media, and in sometimes bigger, but mostly small steps, we are finding our way and becoming a more inclusive museum. I don't really have a long-term strategy to say. We look for possibilities in everything we do. We look at society, we look at changes happening. And we do have successes, and we definitely also fail. But that's good. We learn from our failures. So for me, this works. It keeps inclusivity and diversity on our daily agenda, and it challenges us to keep creative and to keep curious and keep my eyes and ears open. So that's what I want to say to everyone. Stay curious.
Thank you so much, Irma. Thank you so much for your presentation and for the inspiring words. And I think both of your work show beautiful examples of change, how you try to change the narrative, but also try to transform the institution from within. And what you see is that most classical or traditional museums struggle with audience. There is a big so-called gap, a disconnect of audiences. And it's important to think about how to bring people to the museum. And what I see in the examples that you bring up, Irma, is that you said, we work with a lot of people of the community in Den Haag, like the example of Salah Eddin, for example. But also, Asfa, you said that you work with like a group of expertise, people who can make a contribution to the institute. And what I want to ask is, how can you make these connections more sustainable, so that it's not just for a short amount of time, or only for one project, or that the group of expertise can join in for one question that the museum wants to have answers for, but how can you make this more sustainable and more part of the infrastructure of the institute? Who wants to answer?
Shall I answer first?
Yeah, of course.
I always try to maintain, to keep in touch. Like with Munir, he also made a beautiful series of our Delft Blue collection. He didn't only do the Islam project. He made an absolutely beautiful short film about our museum. And also with Saladin, we stay in touch. And that's something that takes time. And energy, but it also gives a lot, because a one-time collaboration just doesn't cut it. Like you said, you have to take it further. And also Kasim, in this case, I've known for years. We met at this project, Hipster Muslim, where he attended. This was also something that happened in The Hague, and he was photographed together with one of our curators, like who's the hipster and who's the Muslim. And then I don't know if you know this project.
Yeah, I know
and
it.
They change clothes, and and this works. Just keeping in touch and talking a lot and staying curious, as I said, like seeing what they're doing, the projects they're working on, and keeping your eyes open.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So,
Asfa, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. So when you were mentioning the expertise group, Did you mean the expertise group that is connected with Musea Bekende Kleur? Because I didn't
Yes.
mention them in this presentation because of the
Oh,
time.
okay. Okay. Oh, I'm
But
sorry.
I would like to deal with the question, of
Yeah.
course. So we have this expertise group that is a group of people who is very active in the field of education, journalistic science, or education, and art as well. And they are connected to us. It's a group of 20 people, youngsters and all the like as well, and elder people, to reflect with us on.
I'm actually not hearing Aspa. I don't know if you are.
Oh, I'm hearing Asfa.
Oh, okay.
Maybe people can comment in the chat if they can hear her.
Okay. Shall I continue?
Yeah, you can continue because everything will be
now I hear her.
taped, and afterwards people can still see the breakout sessions. So you can continue, Asfa.
So these people, this group, they help us reflect on diversity and inclusion. They confront us with their experiences, with their insights, with their perspectives on the material, and they function as a mirror to us. So we can be confronted with our feelings of discomfort and social exclusion in this field. They are connected with us as an expertise group, and we have plans to keep them connected to Musea Bekende Kleur. And it is for Musea Bekende Kleur, I think, really important to meet these people and to hear these people and see what they can mean for the issues that we are dealing with. And well, that is what I can add to the question.
Yeah. Oh, and I think there's so much more that we can unpack right now, but we don't have the time, unfortunately. So I really want to thank you for the presentation, and you gave us an insight in your work and the importance of your work also. So I want to say to the audience, follow them on the internet, follow them on the socials to look what they do and to keep inspired. And I want to thank you, Irma and Asfa, for your contribution and for the work that you do, and success in the field of the arts.
Yes. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for this opportunity. Thanks
Yes,
a lot.
of course.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's happy to be here. Thanks.
So for the audience that is watching, we're going to take a break for 5 minutes, and maybe even with a little bit shorter. And then afterwards, we're coming back and we're going to elaborate on the conclusions that everybody had from all the breakout sessions. So Emily will join us in a few minutes. I see you.
De toute façon, je vais te dire une chose. Ils ont d'autres systèmes que le bateau.
Parce que là, il y en a que deux qui m'ont entendu. Il y en a...
So welcome back, everybody. I hope everybody had a fruitful session in their breakout room. We're going to the third segment. We're going further with the program, and we have another keynote speaker. I'm going to introduce to you Sonia Lawson, director of Palais de Lomé from Togo. Lawson transformed the former German colonial governor's residence in the capital of the Togolese Republic into a place for national and pan-African art and culture in which inclusion and co-creation are the guiding principles. Since opening its doors at the end of 2019, this ambitious renovation, cultural and environmental project funded by the Togolese state has been dedicated to showcasing the diversity of the Togolese and African cultural production in visual arts, design, new media, science and technology. She challenges and opportunities impacting young contemporary art organizations on the African continent. I want to welcome Sonia Lawson and give her the floor.
Thank you for welcoming me. I'm very happy to be here and share with you my experiences in Lomé about the Palais de Lomé. So I wanted to invite all of you to a journey to Togo and a journey throughout various steps while doing this project. So next slide. We are very lucky because the Palais de Lomé is just on the seaside overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. in a 26 acres, so 11 hectares park. So it's a mixture of culture and biodiversity. Next slide. Yes, next slide. So it's a very unique project in an exceptional venue that mixes several types of art. And what is very specific to the venue is that it mixes nature and biodiversity with art, culture. So both of them are mixed together to form something that is unique. So next slide. So yes, some people say that the slides are not showing. I'm sorry. Apparently, do you all see the slides? I just want to make sure. Okay, that's perfect.
Slides, and everybody is seeing the slides, yeah.
Okay, because I had some comments saying that the slides didn't appear. So yes, so it's a mixture of culture and nature with several activities, and we open also restaurants at the end of the year. So I wanted to come back, next slide, to what the venue was before. It was, I think, very important. Next slide. What is very important is that it's also a place that is important to the history of Togo, because it was the place where the history of Togo began, so to say, the history of Togo, of the modern Togo day, because it was first the German colonial, then it was the German governor's palace, and then next slide. I think we have an issue here. Yes, so I wanted to share this image with you. This is very typical of that time, the arrogant colonial German in this building. So it was a place full of history that are uncomfortable, history of colonization. So the first German governor's palace, and then the French, next slide. So the French and then the British. So each time the venue was important for the history of a country. And so if we could move to the next, yes. So these are some pictures of the venue. And I would also like to maybe, yes, let's move. I think it's, yes, so I wanted to invite you to a journey, just speak briefly about the renovation of the building. So the next steps, you will see the pictures. If you could just scroll to the next steps. Here are the pictures of how it was before, because the venue was abandoned for more than 20 years. So it was in total decay. So it's also a journey because all the works have been done by Togolese firms. I'm sorry, I think here we're having an issue with the slides because some people say that they don't see it. So just to make sure, want to make sure that everyone sees it. Is it the case? Because apparently it's not the case.
I think you have to be on speaker view to see the slides.
But I'm supposedly on speaker view.
I think for the people watching.
Okay, so I hope they all see it. So let's move to the next slides, please. Yes, so some of the pictures and others that will come next, other pictures that will come next as well. Here is, for instance, a photography that showcases how it was. So the nature at that time was very powerful. So very beautiful building, but of course we couldn't obviously stay it like that. So with 10 Togolese firms, we transformed it into something else that is now the Palais de Lomé that you can see here with a view to the ocean, to the Atlantic. So I wanted to share this remembrance with you because it was the first step and a very important one for us, very symbolic because we worked with local firms and we invited the workers to discover the exhibition. So it was very important for us to be inclusive and invite them as well to discover, to discover what kind of exhibitions they worked for. So this is the first step. And the second one, so next slide, the second the second exhibition, the second step of a journey now is about the Palais de Lomé, and then the other ones will be, yes, please, the other slide is about the objectives. What we want to say, and I will be very brief about the objective, is really we want to promote a better understanding and knowledge of our cultures, not only from Togo, but from West Africa and beyond, and in Africa and the diasporas, so that it can be a source of inspiration also, and a place of inspiration and initiation to biodiversity and environment as well. So this is very important for us, and everything misses together. So next slide. Really our mission is about reinventing natural and historical heritage to foster creative talents in Africa. So it's always about Africa and nature and creativity. So the major exhibitions, I wanted also to explain you maybe throughout some exhibitions how we did it, how we worked, and what is behind, our philosophy behind. So the next slide is about the Togo of the Kings. So this is very, I would say, very symbolic and important exhibition for us, because it's the first time that the whole Togolese cultures in its various parts are exhibited in a venue. And to do that, we did it with a very original methodology. Next slide. So the methodology we did was to work with the local communities. So the exhibition was co-created by the local communities. We co-created it with them. So the co-creators of the exhibitions are they. So what is very, it's not normally, in a, I would say, a classical museum, and normally what you do is that you have a list of objects and you do your exhibition with a list of objects and collection. Here we just decided to do the other way around. We wanted to listen to their stories. What do they want to share with us? So they showed us some objects that they have that are important to us, to them, to their stories, so the stories of these local communities. So we really wanted to do something very humble, to listen to the people. And I was very lucky that Gaëtan Nusuglo, so one of the curators of the exhibition, he accepted to work, like to listen to the people, to discuss with them and express them so that they could share with us their stories. So maybe another slide also highlights it. So this lady, for instance, shows us what is called a dancing jewel from northern part of Togo. And normally she has never, it belongs to their family, so they never go out. And exceptionally, they accepted to lend it to us because they wanted also the other people from Togo and from the rest of the world to discover and know more about their cultures. So at the beginning, I was very skeptical about the methodology because I said, well, it's not, I had doubts. I said, it's not normally what is done. It's not the traditional method because normally you're not supposed to create an exhibition throughout discoveries and co-create. But at the end, it just worked perfectly fine. And we are very happy and proud to have been able to do that kind of exhibition because the local communities were happy to see their work, what is not work for them, their piece that is important, the objects that are important to them exhibited. So yes, let's maybe move just to other examples. So this is, for instance, at the beginning of the exhibition, we explained the methodology and how we did it, this journey throughout Togo, and the local public, the local audience responded to that in a very positive manner. They were very happy about that. I'm sorry, we don't, yes, so they were very happy about that. Maybe let's move to the other, yes, let's move to the other screen, please. Yes, so yes, I wanted to share also some of the pictures. Let's move. And then, yes, I wanted to share the story of Nashet. So just to give you an example, these objects, for most of them, are already used. and they are object that is used by the population. So it's not what is considered in the West like piece of art. For them, it's not about piece of art. It's object of rituals, object of ancestors, or object that are still used today. So, for instance, these pictures that you're seeing here, and in the next slide are pictures of a diamond of Nashiet. So it was given by people in center of Togo, and they said, well, okay, we can lend it to you for the exhibition, but we will need it for 15 days. So you will need it because we need to do special ceremonies. So we will borrow it you will get it back for 15 days, and then you can have it back again. So we accepted, of course, to do that. So for 15 days, the object disappeared, so to say, from the exhibition, and then they reappeared. So it was for us very humbling experience because we wanted to be respectful to these objects of rituals. So this is one of the exhibitions. So other ones that I will go after to the next slide. So this is also one of the objects that are very important. It's a dress that gives invisibility. So all these dresses are very powerful in symbol or history. And it was for us a very important experience to work with local communities about that. And so maybe we can move to other objects of the exhibition. So each of them having a very important symbolic side. And then, yes, next one, please. Always infused by contemporary art. So this work, for instance, is work by Sokeidor, a contemporary Togolese artist, and he was inspired by the genius of kings. And here, the philosophy of that, he has created an alphabet, and the philosophy is, how can we share if all the wise people could share their know-how, and we do a council of elder with wise people, we can have beautiful experiences and beautiful results. So then let's move to the next one about another exhibition about design. So I will go maybe faster on design. Next slide. It's because we are the first venue in West Africa that has showroom to show design that is not commercial. So it was important for us as well to show this aspect of creativity and how the object can be transformed throughout design. Next slide. So I will, this, for instance, is inspired by the calabash that you can see that is very traditional. It's traditionally used for instance, for drinks. And here, the designer Kosiagesi has transformed it into vases. So each time he's inspired by the tradition, but in another way, in a very contemporary manner. Over slide. So all this is also an opportunity to engage conversation with the local audience. So for instance, this exhibition, Free Borders, next slide. Free Borders is an exhibition that highlights the links between Togo and the rest of the region. So we invited artists from other countries to go and share with us their works. So other slides. And the theme of the exhibition was materiality. So how we could reuse the object. So it was very interesting to open a conversation with the public about the reuse of everyday objects. So next slide, for instance. This I don't know if you say it, are Coca-Cola cans, Nespresso cans, and out of this, Prince Tofa has created a beautiful gown, a beautiful dress. So it's also really an opportunity to discuss about what do we do with our everyday object? Do we just throw them away? So next slide. Yes, we had what was very nice is to see the reaction of the audience and the programs we have with the audience about this exhibition and their discovery of contemporary art and artists. So next slide, because most of them have never been exposed to that before. So it's really, it was really interesting to see how they react at this discovery and the conversations they had among themselves, the public, the conversation they had, the questions they ask, and the way they discover how art and artists can help us also think of our everyday life. Next slide, please. Yes, this one, for instance, is about jerry cans of plastic. So the reuse of plastics that are polluting the continent, but the reuse and the transformation into work of arts. So yes, let's one. For instance, Tete Azanko, this work is enamel bowls. Normally it's made of enamel bowls that were traditionally used in Togo. And the younger generation doesn't know about this enamel bowls. So when they discover bowl, so when they discover the work, it's also an opportunity to speak about these enamel bowls that have disappeared in the way they are used. So each time what we noticed throughout this exhibition is that always it's an opportunity of discussion and conversation about our everyday lives. So next one. So yes, this is the park. So we are very lucky to have this 11-hectare park. So I would say that, and the artists always appreciate that, it's a mixture of art and biodiversity, and biodiversity is very important to us as well. Next, please. So next one, we have pieces of art in the park, in bronze, in marble, but also the park and the biodiversity itself is also the opportunity to think about our environment and the future of it, and also the rediscovery for people from Lomé that were born in the city, the rediscovery of our nature. So next slide, please. And so next one as well, next one. So we have created several atmosphere and landscapes inspired by the landscapes of Togo. So it's also a journey throughout the landscapes of Togo. And these landscapes are inspired by what we have in Togo from north to south. So next slide, please.
Hey, Sonia?
Yes?
Yeah, thank you for the beautiful presentation. We have to look at the time, so we only have a few minutes left. So if you can round up the presentation, we can go to the Q&A.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, perfect.
So, yes, so let's move very fast, sorry. Let's move to, yes, what I wanted to share as well is educational activities. We can move to the next slide. What is very important and next is that we have sessions also with children about the exhibitions, but also nature, biodiversity. And one last thing that is very important to us, next please, is also that we work with storytellers. So each time we're inspired, but what the activities we have already in Togo to engage with the artists data from the Togo. So we also tell stories in our manner. So the next, please. Next one. So what is important, and I want just maybe to go with that, is that, next slide, is that we work to design the exhibition. We also work with local artisans, and this is for us very important to also help enhance the level of craftsmen in ironware, carpenters, or the next slide. This is just a picture that is next, the very next, that was taken in the park with a lizard. It's just the dustbins of the parks. We work with potters to have the dustbins of the park in pottery. So each time it's also very important for us in connection to our local craftsmen and community to work with them to design objects, to create objects for our exhibitions, for the parks. So that's just what I wanted to share with you. And the last one is just comments of the people. So these comments of the people from Togo or Ghana is also very, we are very happy to be able to share experiences and to have audiences that are happy about what they discover. So it's the beginning of a journey, and I hope to see some of you in Togo to discover our cultures. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I can't see you, but it's really wonderful to see this example. Oh, there you are. Nice to see you. It's such an impressive example of institution building, and also of a kind of living institution that's in touch with life, in touch with its context, both in terms of biodiversity, human, social context. So it's really beautiful to see the way you've engaged and connected the museum to its surroundings. And I think this example of the object that you borrowed and then let go back and then brought back again is just such a wonderful example of how an institution can be in tune with the things that and the people that are part of it. I know that you have a question, Mahuti.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thank you very much for this presentation. I'm really impressed by all the visuals and also impressed by the range of discipline you encounter in the institution. I think that's really impressive and something that we can learn a lot about. To answer your question, when are we going to visit? Well, soon, hopefully, because we don't want to miss out on the beautiful, beautiful building and art space you created. We reflect on how museums can or should deal with their own colonial pasts or attachments, and how they attempt to design exhibitions in a way that challenge or disrupt Eurocentric view of the world. And what I really liked is that we've seen beautiful examples when you focus really on the local Togolese context, and you really work also with the local audience. I think it's a very progressive way in how to set up exhibitions, but also work with the community. What do you think institutions, art institutions in the West, like the Netherlands, can learn from your methodology?
I think it humbles its humility and listening to local communities and saying that, of course, you have people with expertise and know-how and knowledge, but it's also good to sometimes listen to other people and to see what kind of ideas they have and what kind of objects they think are worth presenting and stories that are worth being told. So I'm not underestimate the importance of scholarship and knowledge and know-how, academic know-how, but I think it's also good from time to time to be able to listen to the average person that is not exposed to art or culture, but that have things to say and that has also a view to share. And I think you can also engage beautiful dialogues with artists and people that are not exposed to art. So that's one of the things I really appreciated while doing this exhibition, and to see how the audience as well as the artists reacted.
We have a question in the chat from Vapke Feenstra. She says, very interesting, Sonia. Now for you, but in fact a general question on all that work in museums. How do you deal with the borders of the nation of Togo, as they might be different than the cultural borders of kingdoms? Working translocal in culture is a goal, I guess.
Oh, it's a very good question. You know, it's one of the questions we ask ourselves while doing the various exhibitions. So that's why the theme of free borders is also a way to engage artists from West Africa, because Togo was a mixture of various peoples from West Africa. And even in our exhibition about the Togo of the Kings, we spoke about neighboring kingdoms, because we know that our borders were quite artificial, the African borders, and that the kingdoms and the cultural borders are broader. The cultural kingdoms and spaces are broader than the borders. So for us, it's translocal, transborder. So the border are just a fact that, of course, we don't ignore, but they are not the main fact for us, because it goes beyond the borders. And I think the artists already know that, because they share also experiences beyond the borders as well.
Yeah, that's really, really clear. The art scene in Togo is really flourishing. I think also the art scene in whole the continent of Africa that I'm really proud of. You see it in all kind of different disciplines. It's flourishing, it's thriving. What do you think are the biggest chances at this day of time that you can elaborate on as an institution?
Well, we are very lucky in the continent, because it's a continent that is thriving, is full of creativity, and I think it has always been full of creativity. At the same time, having an institution is also an opportunity for an institution to exhibit the works and broaden the knowledge basis about the artists and their works and the dialogues. So I think one of the opportunities are also to share with other countries and artists and exhibit artists from various countries and be able to be a basis of collaboration and partnerships amongst the African countries themselves. So I think that's one of the things we can do about creativity, because it will be a means to also support the artists, exhibit them, and broaden the basis of the people that know their work. So it's one of the things. One of the things we can do.
Can I ask, because you showed a lot of images of a lot of, you managed to engage a lot of people in the institution and in different ways. But I guess that didn't happen overnight. I know how hard it is and how much work. And I'm curious about how you approached that, because I imagine this took time and also a lot of creativity.
Time, creativity, but doubts. I was full of doubts in many things.
What were your doubts?
Yes, about the methodology, about the fact that, well, will the people, given that we are the first institution like that in Togo, will the people understand and get to be interested in it? So all these questions, yes, we asked them. And I think that working with local communities is also a means to at least engage the audience to come. Because some of them know the people that borrowed. So it's also, they went out of curiosity to see, well, you borrowed, you lend us some things. We want to see how it is exhibited. So it was also a means to engage them into coming. So it's a long journey. It's a long journey, and I think a very exciting one as well when you see the outcomes and the reactions. But it's
you obviously achieved a lot. It's really impressive. Yeah, I hope we can come and visit.
I hope so. But as I told you, we were very lucky to work with people that share this philosophy. For instance, Gaëtan Nosuglo, one of the curators of the exhibition, he did a very, I would say, extraordinary work because he went to the chieftaincies. At the beginning, people didn't want to lend us things. They said, well, these objects are very important to us. Some disappeared, so to say. We all know this question of restitutions and how the objects were collected. I put here a question mark about the theme. So they were very reluctant at the beginning to even lend us the object because they said they are important to us. So Gaëtan did a very good work of explaining them our objective and our goals and how respectful we were so that they could accept and they accepted. So I think it was also diplomacy. We learned a lot through this experience. For the whole experience, we learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sonia, for your presentation and for this conversation. We really need to move on because we have another speaker, but thank you very much, and we will follow your great work and your important work in the continent of Africa from Togo. We're going to our last keynote speaker, that is Asma Naim. She's an art historian and chief curator at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Previously, she was a curator of prints, drinks, and photographs at the National Portrait Gallery in the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. Specializing in American and contemporary Islamic art, Naim is particularly interested in the effects of displacement and dispossession, the history of technology, and the sensorial imagination of both artist and the beholder. I want to give you the floor.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Terrific. I want to thank you, Mahoutin, for the kind introduction. It's a privilege to be here today among such inspiring speakers and symposium participants. I'd also like to thank Miriam Weston and Paul Lienji, who were kind enough to invite me to participate and for their generous assistance in the preparations. So next slide, please. And what you see here is an image of a show by the African-American artist Titus Kaphar, who's based in New Haven, Connecticut, and an opening that we had at the National Portrait Gallery, the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. So my talk today will be addressing issues of power and absence within the world of art history, specifically within museums. What are the various obstacles and issues we in the museum world face in creating new narratives in art history and creating a more polyphonic canon? What are some of the problematic structures that continue to support a univocal canon of art history? And I would say, how can I, as a museum professional in 2021, an art historian, a curator, but also an immigrant whose family and ancestry is rooted in the Indian subcontinent, do my part to illuminate the perspectives of those of us who have been in the shadows? As it suggests, my talk will toggle between political and professional, but a constant presence throughout will be the issue of ethics, the moral principles that govern a person's behavior, and the ways in which she moves through life and society. To put it simply, the issue of canon correction is not an arcane academic exercise. As I see it, the issue of canon correction is an ethical responsibility. It directly flows from the duty and obligations to treat fellow human beings with respect and dignity, as Sonia just so beautifully said. To ground these claims, I turn to Immanuel Kant's tract on hospitality. I will also detail some of the work I've engaged in my current position as chief curator at the Baltimore Museum of Art, which is about, for those of you all over the world, it's about 50 miles, I should say 25 miles north of Washington, D.C. Next slide, please. So what is the canon? It's a list of artists, as we know, meant to represent excellence, a set of allegedly universal values, what is truly important, and implicitly in contrast, it suggests those who are absent or inferior. And the position to judge which artists belong in the canon, as we all know, is an exercise in social power. While it appears that individual curators decide which artworks are valued and collected by their own museums, those decisions depend on precedents set by other curators, art historians, critics, art collectors, art dealers, often the most powerful and the most connected to elite institutions and financial systems. Social prejudices, for example, the habits of racism and sexism, have distorted the histories of art and museum collections in favor of white men. At a time when those long excluded are demanding an end to discrimination, museums must respond to rethinking which artists they should collect and exhibit. So for Pankaj Mishra, the Western canon calcified after World War I when the United States emerged as a superpower after European enervation. He describes the West power as, quote, from Plato to NATO, and he describes a grand narrative of liberalism, an unimpeachably good and noble cause of democracy, but where capitalism and imperialism are necessarily implied. So while there are many thematics within the discourse of the canon, what I hope is becoming evident is that the canon bears the trappings of imperialism, nationalism, white power, and in many ways, an Anglo-European imaginary set of standards. It's at this point that I wanted to introduce this tract that you see in front of you, Immanuel Kant, the 18th century German philosopher's Perpetual Peace, a philosophical sketch. It's from 1795. I'm going to perhaps not give as much time as we can to this in the interest of making sure that I keep to my time limit. I'm focusing here on the law of world citizenship, which shall be limited to conditions of universal hospitality. So basically what he's saying in this treatise is that hospitality is a right. Specifically, Kant states, quote, hospitality means the right of a stranger not to be treated as an enemy when he arrives in the land of another. One may refuse to receive him when this can be done without causing his destruction. But so long as he peacefully occupies his place, one may not treat him with hostility. And at the bottom of this slide that you see here, you can see that Kant ends the article talking about imperialism and colonialism and a marked rebuke of those powers in America, in the Caribbean, and in India. So basically what Kant is saying is that it's hospitable for guests to not outstay their welcome. And it's hospitable to treat hosts with respect, and vice versa. Hosts must treat their visitors with respect. So how would Kant have viewed the canon as part of this framework? And I would say that I don't want to create a kind of one-for-one swapping, but we can consider the generative ways that we can map this strand of thought onto museums, our function of serving visitors, and also our permanent collection as physical markers of the canon and imperialist geographies. How can we consider the right of hospitality in the museum context? I would suggest that according to Kantian ethics, we in the museum world must be hospitable to those who have lived on our lands before us, and to those who have not visited the museum before. So broadly speaking, I mean more than actual human beings who enter the space to visit, though of course I absolutely mean the visitors. By those who have not lived in the museums before, I am also, though, referring to objects that encode the aspirations of the powerless. So to put it one way, if the permanent collection represents an entity or a worldview that's a spatial regime that's occupied the museum, then it needs to make way, the permanent collection needs to make way for others who claim ownership, not of the specific land per se that the museum sits, but ownership to the realm of artistic creativity and production. So this is a lot of philosophy. I hope you can forgive me for getting into this, but I wanted to kind of take a moment to unpack many of the notions that we are all propounding in the museum world today, that white male artists need to coexist with those works made by women or non-white practitioners. And I wanted to kind of ground this in an idea of ethics and to use Kant's phrase so that distant parts of the world can come into peaceable relations with each other. And that's really our goal here, I think, for many of us who are participating in this conference. And I also wanted to highlight with this idea that for too long, those of us in the museum world have looked to the idea of temporary exhibitions to inflect the museum's artistic program with principles of equity and inclusion. And all the while, the permanent collections continue to propagate outdated understandings of the canon, of our cultures and our histories. Next slide, please. So I am talking about, I'm also nodding to such incredible thinkers as those you see on the page in front of you, but also those who are not pictured, such as Hannah Arendt and Salah Ben Habib, who have expounded on Kant's treatise with profoundly troubling questions. Is the privilege to be a permanent visitor separate from the right of temporary sojourn? How can a guest become a member? And I will close this section and move on to my work at the Baltimore Museum of Art by just calling up the incredible thinker Akili Mbembe's thoughts. Oh, sorry, if you can go back to the other slide. Akili Mbembe's thoughts saying that since the modern age, the museum has been a powerful device of separation. And he suggests the anti-museum, quote, not an institution, but a figure of another place, one of radical hospitality, a place of refuge. The anti-museum is conceived as a place of unconditional rest and asylum for all rejects of humanity and the wretched of the earth. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to turn to my work at the Baltimore Museum of Art, and specifically the work that I've been doing with our director, Christopher Bedford, and the head of our board, Claire Zamosky-Ziegel. In 2018, we decided to deaccession to sell works of art in our permanent collection. And specifically, we sold 7 works of art by white male artists, Franz Klein, Kenneth Noland, Jules Zalitsky, Robert Rauschenberg, and 2 pieces by Andy Warhol. The museum followed the guidelines established by the American Alliance of Museums and the Association of Art Museum Directors in making this decision. We eliminated objects that we were, based on research and much discussion, convinced that were in areas of repetition in the collection. And in each case, the museum currently holds stronger works by the same artists, and in some cases, more significant versions from the same part of the artist's career. We did this to further our mission of equity, inclusion, social justice, and artistic excellence. We did this to gain a war chest, as our director, Christopher Bedford, says, of monies to buy the works of artists who have been overlooked and to create a more robust understanding of the canon of art history. So we did this during a time, as we all know, where the world is seeing a marked separation between those who have power and those who don't. In 2020 alone, during this incredible pandemic, we saw the world saw the addition of 412 billionaires, and we saw systemic racism and exploitative labor conditions and the victimization of refugees and minorities. But specifically for Baltimore, a city that is primarily Black. It is nearly 68% Black. How can we create a collection as a civic institution that reflects our population and reflects the voices that the artistic community in Baltimore has been achieving so beautifully for so many decades? Next slide, please. So in the 3 years since that deaccession, we have been acquiring works in the contemporary art collection. The Baltimore Museum of Art is an encyclopedic collection, but I'm only here talking about our contemporary art collection, so post-1960. We had a total of 298 objects. That includes gifts and purchases. And as you see, 33% of them were made by female identifying artists, and 42% of them were made by what we are calling BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, artists who identify as that. Now that includes gifts and purchases. If you go down to the just purchases, that number dramatically increases in both of those demographics. So out of 128 purchases, 50% were made by female identifying artists, 4% by non-binary identifying artists, 71% by BIPOC artists. When you look at the gifts, on the other hand, you can see how tilted that is towards white male identifying artists. So that's something that I think is also important to note. Next slide, please. And out of our 128 purchases, we brought in works from 85 artists or artist collaboratives, and most are entering the collection for the first time. So for those of you who are wondering in terms of how much we spent more than $7 million in spend down funds to date, and we have approximately $8 million left of the original proceeds, which we will begin to draw on for future purchases over the next 3 years. And next slide, please. I just wanted to give you an example of some of the works that we brought in. These are all American artists: Mickalene Thomas, who's based in New York, Tamashi Jackson, Fred Eversley, Benny Andrews, Ed Clark, Mark Bradford, and Nona Faustine. So see, these are some of the examples and the wide-ranging vocabularies of the artists whose work we've acquired. Next slide, please. Another imperative that we have embarked on is to dedicate an entire year of exhibitions, programs, and acquisitions to female identifying artists. We called this initiative 2020 Vision, and it was to celebrate the 100th anniversary that some women got to have the right to vote, the 19th Amendment. Not all women were granted the right to vote with that amendment in 1920. So our initiative included 23 exhibitions in the museum. We were very busy. It began in the fall of 2019 and is extended currently into 2021. It was 16 solo exhibitions, 7 thematic shows. We included a large-scale transformative commission by Mickalene Thomas. We have an upcoming major monographic survey of Joan Mitchell's career. And we had a reinstallation of several of the museum's galleries to emphasize the depth and diversity of women's artistry through time. Our current exhibitions that are up right now include the work of Sharon Lockhart, Shabalala Self, and Lisa Yuskavich. Next slide, please. And because we are a quasi-encyclopedic museum, these are the range of exhibitions that we had on view devoted to female practitioners or female leaders. So you see here Lakota beadwork, beaded works created by 19th century Lakota tribe women who subversively incorporated the American flag into traditional Native American designs. You also see here a perfect power, motherhood and African art, a range of objects from monumental headdresses of elderly mothers to sculptures of representing mythic female ancestors, to demonstrate the cultural significance of matrilineal power in Africa's central belt. We also have at the bottom here the extraordinary legacy of a former director of the museum, Adeline Brieskin, who was commissioned the U.S. Pavilion for the 1960 Venice Biennale. And you also see here the work of Ellen L'Esperance, who created a suite of 7 exquisite paintings from her ongoing participatory project. Next slide, please. And I wanted to give you a further taste of some of the other exhibitions that were on view: Anna Mendieta, Katerina Grossa, Cheyenne Wallace, Zachary Drucker, Howardina Pindell, Elisa Blount Moorhead, Bradford Young, and Joe Smale. Next slide, please. One of our keystone exhibitions was the work of Candice Breitz, who is Berlin-based but born in South Africa. And that show was up last year. And if you can go to the next slide. It featured 2 evocative multi-channel video installations that reflected on privilege, visibility, and shrinking attention spans in an information economy that is focused on celebrity and thrives on entertainment. So 2 works were presented: Love Story from 2016, which recounts the experiences of 6 refugees as told by themselves and by Hollywood actors Julianne Moore and Alec Baldwin. And then this work, Too Long Didn't Read, 2017, which was conceived and produced in dialogue with the Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force in Cape Town, South Africa. Next slide, please. Another exhibition that we had during the Year of the Woman was looking at the work of Valerie Maynard, born in Harlem, a contemporary of James Baldwin, and a current Baltimore resident. Next slide, please. Valerie Maynard's One Gallery retrospective celebrated the 6-decade career of this Harlem-born printmaker and sculptor. It featured a range of works, including the landmark work No Apartheid series from the 80s and 90s, which featured a colophon introduction by the esteemed writer Toni Morrison. And this was one of the only, I should say, the only retrospective of Valerie Maynard's work in her 6-decade-long career. Next slide, please. And so this is another example of her work up close. Get Me Another Heart. This one's been broken too many times, so you can see her beautiful technique. Next slide, please. And then just a smattering of some of the works that we've acquired during the Year of the Woman, including Lois Mayu Jones, some Chinese beautiful drawings, Katerina Grossa's work, Margaret Burroughs, that print of the Black Venus, Wendy Red Star, the now recently passed Zarina, Betty Saar, and Kay Walking Stick. Next slide, please. So before I conclude, I just wanted to say that we have 95,000 objects at the museum. 4% of them are made by female identifying artists. The first painting that entered the collection was was made by the first American woman to succeed as a professional artist, Sarah Marion Peel. And we've continued to break boundaries in terms of acquiring works by overlooked artists. So we've spent nearly $3 million adding 65 works to the collection by 49 female identifying artists, including 40 who had not previously been represented at the museum. And this last slide is showing you the Souls Grown Deep Foundation works that we acquired. We acquired over 21 works from this foundation. And these are works that were made in the South, so south of the eastern seaboard of the United States, but the southern part of that seaboard, by African-American artists who were not traditionally or professionally trained. And the roots of these works can be traced to slave cemeteries and secluded woods, and as in the aftermath of the Civil War, where the Southern agrarian economy, with the disbandment of slavery, collapsed. And so with these new objects, we're creating a much more accessible language of quilts, yard arts, and other kinds of art making that celebrate the joy of the Southern landscape. And so that's my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you very much, Asma, Naeem, for this beautiful presentation. There is so much that you touched in this short amount of time. There's a lot to talk about, but we can only focus on a few of the topics. And one of the perspectives that I really liked and admired and think that is a nice contribution of all the presentations that we heard today was about changing the narrative. There are a lot of artists who are overlooked because they were women or people of color, and they weren't given the opportunities or attention that other artists got, while they have equally artistic excellence as traditional masters. And what are the main obstacles or challenges you face in the art museum world in creating these new narratives? Also what you said by purchasing new works of art and making it more permanent and sustainable in the infrastructure of the institution.
That's a great question. Thank you. And thank you for the kind words. I think the obstacles we face in the museum world are shared no matter where we live. And that is in terms of education, educating the collectors, educating the public, educating those who have moving into minimalism. How do we expand those understandings to include the kinds of works that you see on the page right now? And that requires many conversations and education, I think.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah.
It looks like you're building an incredible collection, and the way that you're doing it also came through a very brave, bold move. And I'm wondering, yeah, what was the challenges in, I mean, I can imagine you received quite a kind of a lot of opposition to that. So how did you, how did you enact it, and what were the challenges in doing that?
Thank you, Emily. It's something that more and more institutions here in the United States are looking towards. But yes, at the time it was filled with a lot of consideration and thoughtful approaches to make sure that we included the voices of all of those who had something to say. So that meant not just our board, not just the curators, though it had many discussions among the curators and the board, but also having conversations with our peers, other museum leaders, and those in the Baltimore community. And so I think that there is an ongoing discussion that needs to be had and a lot of listening, because there are many, many different perspectives on what we did. And there are many of those whom I widely admire, who would not suggest moving down this path. But I think that the decision that we made at the Baltimore Museum of Art was a very thoughtful one, highly researched, and it went slowly to make sure that we incorporated the thoughts and concerns of those who may not have wanted it originally to have happened.
I was also curious about, you talked a lot about power dynamics, and in a way, as a museum, you can never really avoid that, you know, like even in deconstructing the canon, you also still have to make a lot of choices about what you include and exclude. So I'm just curious about, how do you navigate that? How do you kind of open up the museum further from here?
It's exactly what Sonia was saying. It's constant vigilance and a constant balancing and rebalancing. So when you're seeing folks who are unheard or who have not been traditionally considered, it requires a moment of pause and a consideration of ways to bring in their voices into the process. So
museums and cultural institutions are facing unique opportunities and challenges also to reimagine and reshape the art institutions. If I can ask you more of a philosophical question, how do you envision a decolonial future for museums and art spaces?
I think that's a beautiful question, Mahuten, and I think that together we can find a way. I think that it's imperative that we continue to communicate across the globe. And listening to your beautiful program today makes me see that it's an urgent project for all of us. I will say that there is the fundamental foundation of museums is working with state systems and working with capitalistic systems that are built on wealth. We need to find a way to move forward that also includes the voices of the artists. And so for me, that is one of the most important things, that the ways in which we honor those who have made the museum in terms of their financial wealth, we also need to honor those who've made the museum in terms of their creativity. So we need to direct resources, direct our attentions, direct days of the week, direct hours in our day to making sure that we're honoring the artists.
I think that's an important point to finish on. I think we have to wrap up, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was really impressive to hear about what you've done, what you've achieved.
Thank you. I hope to come to Amsterdam soon, and Togo. So
we'll make a tour. We'll make a tour with all our table guests. It would be amazing.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Asma Naeem.
Thank you.
So we are at the end of the program, almost. We had beautiful speakers, beautiful keynote speakers who all gave their reflection and their inspiring words of the change they make in the world of arts. And somebody in the big welcome said, they are change agents, and I really see that they trying to disrupt the atmosphere and disrupt the world. But also what I see that sometimes you have to be also a chaos agent to make a change. And that's what we saw. And that's what I heard. Like ask the important questions and also act on that. So it's a reflection, but it's also taking action and to be bold enough and brave enough to make those changes. Even though there's a lot of critique and unwillingness, and that we have to continue to talk with each other, learn, and be uncomfortable with the new situation.
Good points. I mean, I think what I took today is that so many women who've spoken about very brave and uncompromising work, approaches to making change, and also ways of using the structures at our disposal to create social and institutional change, making institutions that reflect the world that we're living in. And I think there was a lot of talk about education, actually, and how we can open up through sharing in a horizontal ways that involve people in the broadest sense. I think we all know there's a lot to be done still. So that's why it was very inspiring to hear so many people who are doing things, enacting change, however difficult it is. And also that there's a hunger for change. So I hope that we can take a lot away from today. And I think it's also something that we have to do together. So thank you so much to the organizers of today, Miriam, Pauline. Thank you, Martin, and all the speakers. I think we have one more contribution.
Yes. So I also want to thank all the speakers and all of our guests. I want to thank you, Emily. Of course, ArtTable, Mirjam Wester for making this all possible, and Pauline G for really working and having hard and having a great contribution for making this event possible. With a full heart, I
just want to say event. The technical team as well.
Yes. So with a full heart, I want to close this symposium and give the final words to none other than Babs Gons, and Mirjam Wester will close this conference. Babs, to you.
Hello. We would like to invite you to our stage as a woman. Could you be black for us on Wednesday? We have a show and we are looking for people like you for our performance, our platform, our magazine, our talk show. Could you make it a little less female tonight? And we love to book you on Saturday. We're down with brown, but not too much. You know, just normal. For the vibe of our show, we're looking for something more indignant. A little bit more spit in the corners of the mouth, a little more finger wagging to the face. Ooh, could you make it a little bit more sexy? Could you give us some more smiles? Could you give us some more world problems? A little Me Too, single mom, absent father, a bad youth. Not too much emphasis, just a little trauma between the lines. We would love for you to wear a dress or a headscarf, a little badou, a little soulful. Can you give us some more angry black woman? Not too much, just a little bit more woke, unapologetic, not too much, just enough for the audience to be uncomfortable, to snap their fingers, to clap. Would you bow for us? Sorry. We have to skip you this time. We already have someone like you at the table, in our performance, our platform, our magazine, our talk show. We have enough of you. Thank you. Maybe next time. We expected you to be a little bit younger, more feminine, more right, more left, white, black, a bit more visible, invisible. Don't get angry. We love to have you talk about your anger in our performance, in our show, our platform, our magazine, our talk show. We're really interested. Don't get angry. We would really love for you to talk about. You would really fit into our Please Don't Get Angry. We mean well. Our intentions are good. We mean well.
Thank you so much, Babs, with your wonderful words. I have to thank everybody. I want to thank everybody. First of all, you who has been participating, you all listeners, participants of our symposium. There had been more than 500 registrations, and you were with us for the whole afternoon, which was a long afternoon, but which offered us a lot of insights. I think the funds that made this symposium possible, the Amsterdam Funds for the Arts, the Prince Bernhard Culture Funds and the Niemeyer Funds. And of course, I think, first of all, our speakers and the artists, Babs Gons and Jeanne van Heeswijk. I speak our moderators. I want to thank our moderators, Emily Pettick and Mahuti Awuno. And last but not least, our project leader, Paulian G., who made it possible that this was being organized fantastically, especially in this COVID-stricken time where everything was unsure and shaken. She kept going till the end, till today. And we from ArtTable Netherlands, as a chair of ArtTable Netherlands, I thank her.
Included. So it's a mixture of nature and culture, biodiversity and culture.